Perfect. Hello, world. What is up? Welcome to Build. I'm your host, Matt Forte. We are here live at the Build Studio in New York City. In Season 2 of Amazon Prime's The Tick, Tick and Arthur face their greatest challenge yet, paperwork. With an ever-expanding universe, Season 2 takes everything you loved about Season 1 and cranks it all the way up. There's new heroes, new villains, a new suit. It's got it all. You'll recognize our next guest as Arthur Everest himself, and if you close your eyes and just listen, you may even recognize him as the co-host of the fantastic movie podcast Blank Check. I'm excited he's here. You should be too. The great Griffin Newman's in the building, ladies. How about that? Come on, make some noise, ladies and gentlemen. Let me hear some noise. All right, good. That was an appropriate amount of noise. All right, we're going to bring him out in just a moment, but first, I believe we have a trailer for Season 2, so let's go ahead and run that clip.
Yesterday you bested your nemesis. Today you wake anew, ready to begin following the hero's way.
I think you're right, Tick.
What?
I'm in.
Really?
Yeah.
Fantastic!
I have been itching to hone that danger reflex of yours.
And quick.
What?
We'll be working on that one a lot, chum.
City's been freed from the terror.
New villains will plunder. New heroes will rise.
I'm with Aegis. We're reopening the local Aegis branch.
Next stop, testing. Stand in the yellow square.
The yellow square says danger.
Yes, that's the one.
Sage, the supernumerary. I wield the mystic power of the blind eye.
Blind? It's staring right at me.
Everyone keeps talking about this new wave of heroes.
Well, this is a little fun.
Right?
Well, I'll give them a wave. I'll give them a damn tsunami.
Miss Lint is continuing the spree of evil. It's a spreevil!
Walking into the battle like we already won.
Okay.
We made it here.
Getting a mission ready.
Ain't going back.
Welcome to the club.
You're so up for a mission.
First rule of the club is shut up.
He runs hot.
We got more power together.
Hello, boys.
I'm really grateful that I met you all, and I really want to help you not go extinct.
Ron Star was saying we should do a team up. Oh, the team ups.
Who doesn't love a team up?
I need to kill.
You need a hug.
What was that?
Hug fight!
We got more power.
Ladies and gentlemen, make a ridiculous amount of noise. Griffin Newman's right here. Come on, ridiculous!
Absurd amount of noise.
Yeah, I thought so, right? They
nice
really
sneakers. I just
thanks,
noticed.
Man.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Nice show, dude.
Thank you.
Yeah, Thank
you.
This show is fantastic. I'm really excited to talk to you about it. Season 2, everything, like I said in the intro, everything I loved about Season 1 and more. I love where you guys are going. I love what you're doing. I'm really excited to talk to you about it. Just first and foremost, Griffin, how are you, man? How's life being Griffin right now?
It's okay. I mean, I live in a perpetual state of anxiety. Much like my character, which is, I think, why they hired me, because it meant less acting required. So I think, you know, when I do, like, press stuff like this and people are like, oh, you must be feeling great, Season 2, it's just like, but then it's like, there's always, what about Season 3? What's the one bad review? You know, I stay up late Googling until I find something bad that someone said about me.
I'm going to tell you something.
Or about my haircut or something. Yeah.
Let's see where this falls on the radar for you.
Sure.
I just found this moments before coming on stage. I like to do as much research as I possibly can going into this. And they just pointed out to me when we Googled you, you have an entry on Wiki Feet Men, which I think is a sign.
I do?
You do, yes.
I
this
did
is
not
true.
know about
I
this.
think this is a sign that you've achieved a level of fame
Yeah.
that is very special.
Career anxiety gone. That's the only thing I've been working to. Do we have it?
I didn't know
Can
if it
someone
was
look it up?
appropriate to pull up, but it's there.
It is. I'd love to hear what the stats are.
You're actually not too bad. I think it's, I want to say 2.5, which isn't terrible.
Out of
Stars.
5 feet?
Out of 5, yeah, out of 5
Okay.
feet.
Okay.
But there's only one photo, so we really got to bolster those numbers. What they're missing is it says shoe size, not determined. They don't know
Yeah.
your shoe size.
Yeah.
So we have to somehow seed that into the wild.
Here's a fun fact. I don't know if I know my own shoe size.
Fair enough.
I always buy the wrong size shoes. This is true.
You get there eventually. Yeah.
No, most of my shoes just don't fit.
You just accept, well,
I kind of
this is how
spitball
shoes
it.
feel.
I fill it out. I'm like, I don't know. That sounds like a number. There was a period of time where I kept on thinking my shoe size was 8.5, and I would get shoes in 8.5, and then I realized it was just because of the movie. I was like, why does that number sound familiar? And it was like, oh, because there's a movie that has nothing to do with your feet that has that title.
And you just drew that connection that must be what my shoe size is? It just
No, I mean, here's another problem I had. I once lived in apartment 23, but I filled out all my employment paperwork as apartment 22 because of Don't Trust the Bee in apartment 22, which was a show I didn't watch.
No, but you knew of it.
I knew of it, and I was like, there's some reason why that sounds familiar, and I filled out the
That must be
paperwork,
it.
and then for months, my next-door neighbor was getting all of my paychecks.
You're filling out your social security 8675309. Like, you
Right,
don't have
yes.
the no numbers are your own.
No,
You
I have like no number retention. So if there's any catchy thing in pop culture that has a number, I'm like, that's probably, I'm remembering it for a reason.
That's for me.
Yeah,
What
that's
that
for me. That's my number.
You know, you talk about your anxiety and how similarities between you and Arthur, and not just that, but in general. When I watch the show and knowing you as I know you through the work that you do, you are very much perfect for this role. You are so good at it, and I mean that as a high compliment.
I take
like,
that as one.
yeah, okay,
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
I didn't want to be like, you are the most anxious person I've ever met,
no,
and
but
therefore throw some wings on him.
It is. It is nice. It was when I read this script, and I was a big fan of the previous versions of The Tick. So it was like a character I love as part of a property that I love that I never even considered. Oh, maybe that's something you could play someday. And then when I got the script, and I went like, oh wow, this does feel like the thing that I'm perfectly made for. Which then the anxiety became, if I don't get this, then what am I doing? You know? It was like, there's not going to be a thing I want more than this.
I forget who I was just talking to about that recently, but they were talking about a role that like the writer said, "Oh, I wrote it for you," and it's like that's got to be a huge amount of pressure.
Right.
Like,
Yes.
You can't do it. Who can?
Right. I had that self-inflicted pressure, but I think that works for the character. I mean, Arthur's whole thing is that he's this guy who's terrified and has rampant anxiety and a history of mental issues and is sort of marginalized and ignored by society, but there's something about him that still drives him to do this thing that on its face is very scary and dangerous. And so I remember one time Ben Edlund, the creator and the showrunner, asked me how I like get nervous for scenes, especially in the scenes where we're like running and you have to act like, no, but you know, like, it will show up, yes. But you know, there's so many of those scenes where it's like, oh, we're shooting like a foot chase that takes place for like 2 minutes, but you end up shooting all those pieces out of order, and sometimes days apart, and it's like, we're pretending that this is the same block as that block. So you have to very quickly jump into acting like you've been running for the last like 8 minutes. And he said, what did you do to get in that state? And I go, I just remember that I have the ability to ruin this entire show. I like look around at the crew and all the equipment, and I go, right, I could single-handedly ruin this.
All of these people could be out of a job like that.
Right, he has kids, he's got bills to pay. And I just I go, okay, there, I think I'm there. I think I found the character. That's the thing, yeah.
And that's to say nothing of the fan base. You haven't even, your anxiety hasn't even left the lot yet. Like, that's just in your immediate surroundings.
Right.
How the hell do you navigate all that?
Well, I'll say that. The thing that I think is an asset to me is that I was such a big fan. So I don't have to do any of that mind's eye stuff of like, I went crazy on research, but it was more, any single Tick-related thing. I read every single panel of every Tick comic that had ever been published, and the Tick is still owned by New England Comics, which is the local comic book store that Ben Edlund used to go to when he was 16 years old, and he created this character for their newsletter. And then 30 years later, it's this, whatever this is.
Whatever this is.
But so they're not Marvel. They're not one of these big entities that has readily available reprints of every. So it like took a lot of work to figure out. Because they're even the master list. I would ask like, does anyone have a list of every? And they were like, we don't keep track of that. So I found all those. I rewatched every episode of both of the previous series, the cartoon show and the sitcom with Patrick Warburton. I just I went into every single like sort of little nook and cranny, but it wasn't like I was then approaching and going like, why do people like this? What is the thing? Yeah. I was more trying to just have all that stuff fresh in my memory, but also I try to on set rely on like you can't speak for all fans, but you were a big fan. You were like, a 12-year-old kid who would like scan TV Guide to figure out when the Warburton show was airing because they would change its time slot every week. They were like trying so hard to cancel that show. And I was like, you put effort into making sure you didn't miss an episode. So like make the show that guy wants to see. Because if I wasn't on the show, I would be one of the people most excited to see it. So that like even if I'm wrong, it's like at least it's coming from a place of, I can't represent what every fan wants out of the Tick, especially because you find as you're doing this stuff, we talk to people and it's like, oh, I only really like the comics. The Warburton show is the only good one, or I only like the cartoon, or I like these two, or I like this one, or they're people who don't know any of the previous ones. And the thing that's unique about the Tick is that every time he does it, it's a very different thing. It's not James Bond where it's just like one sort of loose narrative going on forever, but it's also not Spider-Man where you just keep on resetting back to a guy being in high school and having his uncle die again. It's like every time he's done it, he's sort of done it in a new medium. It's been the same creator every time, and he's kind of had a new tone and new cast members bring their own to it. So it's like that balance of like, the fan pressure I can deal with because it's the same, my self-inflicted pressure.
And I always loved that about the Tick is that it was the same creator every time.
Yeah.
And just like seeing what Ben wanted to try different this time and what his different take was on it.
Which is like unique. I mean, I've been saying this. We've been doing this show for like 3 years now since the pilot was 3 years ago. And I say this almost every time I do an interview, and I wait to be corrected on this, but no one has. I think that is the only instance of one creator still remaining the key force behind different permutations. It's not just like, oh, I wrote all of these books, but that he keeps resetting it. He takes it to different companies. He puts it in different mediums. He reinvents it every 10 years.
And not just
but Stan Lee didn't direct Spider-Man movies, or write them or any of that. Ben has always been the guy.
The level of involvement that Ben has had, I think, is what's unique. And the amount of this vision being his vision is what's unique.
Right, I'll have that sort of sniff test from fans sometimes where they're like, so what, is Ben like a consultant on this? And I'm like, it's his show. It's entirely, you can't make the Tick without Ben Edlund, which you realize when you talk to him, you're like, oh, you talk like the Tick. Well, people are like, how do you write those monologues? It's like, that's what he talks like all the time. But yeah, I mean, the thing that I think is interesting about it is because it's like a satire of superhero media, it's new every time he brings it out because he makes it in direct dialogue with whatever is going on in the culture. He's not just like, I'm going to reboot that whole thing and do it for a new generation. Because this show, we're existing in a world with like the recently departed Marvel Netflix shows and the CW shows and all the movies and all of that. When they did the Warburton show, there weren't any superhero TV shows. It was in between the first X-Men and the first Spider-Man coming out. There was barely a language for how you did live-action superheroes because it had only really worked with Superman and Batman, and both of those were dormant at the time. And the cartoon show was like on the same time as X-Men and Spider-Man and Batman the Animated Series. And I think for a lot of weirdos in the 90s, if you were a weird kid, you'd be flipping through the channels and you go, well, this one looks the same as the other shows, but something's going on.
It aired
here.
alongside, but like
It was
Arthur
like
had a
in
punch.
between
It was
two Marvel
weird. There was
shows,
the
right.
VLM. There were all these weird things, but
Right.
it aired right next to those normal shows. But
Right.
you were like,
Right.
this one's different for some reason.
Right, so it felt like that show was kind of like a sort of beacon for like weirdo kids. And I have so many friends who are like, I used to watch that show with my mom and dad. That was the only kid show that they liked. Because they would walk past making breakfast while I was watching it, and they'd be like, wait, why does Sewer Urchin sound like Rain Man? Like, why is like... Exactly. Right. Why does this episode have like a Jewish wedding in it? Yeah.
There was something that Tick has never lost as it's updated its critique and it had the world around it to critique is that the way in which it roots everything in reality, which is by getting this fantastical world but wrapped up in like the day-to-day, like the
Bringing it
mundane
down to
stuff
the
and
real
bringing it
mundane.
right
Right.
down to like to the absolute
Ben always
ground.
says that like at the end of the day, the key to the Tick is two superheroes sitting in a crappy living room drinking coffee. It's just like, what's their crappy apartment like? I mean, one of my favorite things about our show is that like in episode 2, a bunch of bad guys raid my apartment and make a total mess of the place. And now at the end of season 2, we still haven't fixed any of the damage. And I'm like, right, that happened. Like, I had my ceiling collapsed while we were filming the season, and it took me 6 months to get it fixed. Because I was like, I don't want to call my landlord. It's stressful. I'm not going to deal with this. I'll just live in a caved-in apartment. And that's like what Arthur's living. Like, there are these like superheroes, but it's like,
how much of Griffin justified him not getting it fixed? But well, in this show he's not doing it. So
there's
I
some
guess
of that. There are weird instances too of like life imitating art, or art imitating life. We have this season, a normal thing that every show does in its second season. We adopt a bunch of talking lobster babies and try to raise them in our bathtub.
Typical sophomore slump behavior.
Yes,
Get the lobster
right.
babies
The
in
thing's
there.
on rails now.
Exactly.
It really is. So we got the lobster babies in the tub, and the Tick and I are putting dead starfish into blenders, and they're fake, they're props, and then mushing up starfish, and then trying to feed them with like an eyedropper. These baby lobsters, we can't get them to eat, and I was like, this is so tough. As an actor, it's tough to connect to this because this is so ridiculous. And they're puppets, and you see these guys underneath the floorboards with sticks trying to maneuver these lobsters. And you're like, this is such a heightened reality. And 4 days after we shot that scene, I came home from filming and found 4 baby kittens hidden under my dresser in my apartment. And an alley cat had, because it was the summer, AC is expensive. I kept my window open. An alley cat crawled through the window, gave birth to 4 kittens in my apartment, and left. And suddenly I was doing this. Yeah. I'm allergic to cats, and I had 4 kittens in a box, and I went to my
I gotta get some
neighbors and best
starfish. I've
friends helped me out significantly, and then ended up pretty much raising them. But we went to a 24-hour vet's office and begged in the lobby for them to give us free formula, and then we're sitting there and doing the thing with the tweezer. And it was I wish this had happened a week earlier. My acting would have been better.
I could have used.
I know what this feels like now. But we named them all after Tick characters.
Oh, did you really?
Yeah. I mean, Arthur was my favorite one. I obviously
naturally.
named the cat after myself, who I thought had pluck.
Did they all find? Well, you're allergic, so obviously you can't keep
I'm
them.
allergic. Yeah, no, we adopted
They all
them
found
off
forever
in
homes.
pairs.
Yeah. they're all-
So yeah,
Oh, they're in
one
pairs
couple
too. Even better.
took. Yeah.
Wow, you really did it upright, man. You really.
It was crazy. Yeah. But there's a weird amount of overlapping with all of those things.
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Well, another show that I love that this reminds me of is Venture Brothers.
Yeah.
Which they kind of do a similar thing of just bringing it all the way down to the ground. And I thought this was really interesting. Ben apparently introduced.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Jackson Public was his college roommate, I believe.
Yeah.
And Chris McCullough was when Ben stopped doing the comic book because he had gotten the cartoon show. Chris McCullough was the second guy to write The Tick. He was who Ben handed it off to in order to keep the comic book series going. And then the cartoon became such a burden of work that then he hired McCullough onto the cartoon and then had to find other people to write the comic book. But yeah, I mean, Jackson Public and Chris McCullough are the only 2 writers. They've written every episode of Venture Brothers save for Ben Edlund. He's the only other person who's written on that show. And he's the guy who's brought them together. I certainly feel like this iteration, I feel like it's those 3 guys have very similar sort of DNA.
Yeah, they're all in the same wave.
And the way they sort of digest pop culture and then bring it into these really banal places. Yeah.
Were you at all? Sorry to go off on that tangent. That was
No.
something I thought was really interesting.
Yeah.
But coming into season 2, we talk about all this stuff. Were you at all just a little bit more confident now, having done at least the first 12 and having that under your belt? Did you feel a little bit better? How do you feel now?
Yeah, great. First of all, I appreciate you turning this into a therapy session because it's better. It's always better if you can find a way to get your therapy for free.
I'm just trying to make you get the most amount of the bang for your buck. You're going to be
I'm not
here
being
either
sarcastic.
way.
I
We gotta
genuinely
talk
need
about the
this.
Tick.
Yeah. Was I any more confident? Well, here's how fundamentally broken I am as a real person.
Let's dive in.
I was stressed out about the fact that I wasn't feeling stressed out enough. If that makes sense. I was season 1, you had such a chip on your shoulder. You had to prove to people that you could do this. You didn't know if the show was going to work. And then it was people liked it. We got renewed season 2, and I was like, oh my God, I'm too calm. So I started freaking out about the fact that I was too calm, and I was like, this character's supposed to be nervous. Are you going to get sloppy? Are you going to get lazy? And I started stressing out about that, and then I was like, oh, well, okay, now you're stressed again. Great, just run with that.
That's so weird.
It lasted for about 5 days. I was like, you're too chill.
That parallels a lot of like, maybe I'm, maybe I was
Two.
gonna say,
Yeah,
maybe this
yeah.
is a stretch, but not even just your character. The show as a whole, like Tick and his identity is like the only reason he becomes like concerned about his identity and who he is because people keep bringing it up and telling him he should be worried about it.
Right, the Tick
Like-
doesn't think about the fact that he doesn't have a backstory and he doesn't know what his name is until people ask him, and then he goes like, wait, is that a thing I'm supposed to be worrying about? And Arthur, you know, I think the big thing with this season is like season 1 was a lot of refusal of the call. And season 2 is like, he's not fighting anymore. He's accepted it. He's made his bed. He wants to be a superhero. But now it's like, how do you make a career out of this? And I know I certainly felt that thing as like a struggling actor where you're like fighting and fighting all these auditions, trying to get people to consider you. And then they hire you and you're like, wait a second, I don't know if I can do this. Auditioning is totally different than like actually being on set and having to work 13 hours. And so you show up and you're like terrified because you're like, I've spent like years trying to tell people like, I got the goods. And then they're like, you got the goods. And you're like, wait a second, I never promised. There's no guarantee. I mean, don't take my word for it. If you independently feel that I have the goods,
I want you to tell me.
we could do a trial run. Yeah. But that's what it felt like, yeah.
Have you felt at all as the podcast has gotten more popular and more people listen to it, and you become known as like someone who has like these strong opinions on storytelling and this perspective and this point of view? Has any of that permeated in such a way where like people have solicited an opinion from you on set? Has it been collaborative of like, well, what do you think, Griffin? Like, what do you think Arthur should be doing here, or something like that? Has it come in that way that people have recognized that you're that type of person yet, like in a way that they want to work with you?
Yeah, I think that happens. I mean, Ben is very collaborative, and I think the whole cast is very collaborative in a way that's nice. Sometimes you work on movies or shows where people are like, actors are weirdly competitive with each other or sort of standoffish. And especially when you're doing a comedy, it's so nice if you can really work with someone and collaborate and try to build something together. So I feel like naturally the environment is like that. I don't think anyone asked me more because of the podcast. I think if anything, it comes up that like at this point, I'm like the biggest fan within the show of the Tick history. And even Ben sometimes doesn't remember the things that have happened in the Tick history. So they will like consult sometimes on that, being like, what would you do? Like, there are a couple times I've suggested to Ben something from the comics, and he's been like, oh, right.
You gotta like that's gotta be a fun little moment for you.
It's really
you
cool.
love that, right? Like,
yeah. It's very, very cool. But we're all like, I mean, it's weird too because, you know, Peter and I, Serafinowicz, who plays the Tick, we both come from like comedy backgrounds. He comes from a far more successful comedy background, but we both came from like doing sketch comedy. For him, it was on the BBC, and for me, it was in like a basement for 3 people. But so we have that sort of, we did it. For those 2 people. And they felt uncomfortable. It's a lot of pressure on me to laugh. But sketch comedy in particular is very collaborative. Because you're like, it's about the timing of the group and the whole sketch having an energy to it. It's not just about individual siloed performances. You're really gunning for something. So very often, like, we'll have that sort of like input into things, but it will be me throwing out a Tick thing or him throwing out an Arthur thing. Because we approach it so much like a comedy duo now, like we're like giving a joint performance, that he'll sometimes go like, doesn't it feel like Arthur should do something like this? And then I'll go like, yeah, and then we'll bring Ben in and we go, like, here's the template. Because it's hard to improvise Ben dialogue. Spreevil, I will say, which was in the trailer, was a Peter line, which feels like a Ben line. But often it's these very long soliloquies. So we'll go like, it feels like Tick wouldn't understand this. You know, like I'll point out like, Tick wouldn't know that a dog is a dog. And then he'll go like, okay, I'll come up with a dog joke. Yeah.
Is it? We're going to go to audience questions in just a second because we have to and we have some and I want to get to them and I want to take time. But you know, I'm thinking of just like you talk about how you had all the lobster puppets. I know I read that his antennae.
Yeah.
They're also
100%
practical and
no CGI.
When you have all these practical effects on the set, is it hard?
Incredibly difficult.
Well, not just that, but in
I'm
specifically.
Answer your
No, we're going to keep going. I won't let you. I won't let you take it.
Okay. Yeah. Incredibly difficult.
Is it incredibly difficult to find room to improvise, to add stuff to that moment because there's so much choreographed?
Yeah, and here's the other thing. There is no acting program in the world that teaches you how to do that. You know? Like there are many different sort of schools of thought on acting and different
Basement
systems.
didn't prepare you for this. The basement did not.
Right, but like there is no sort of practical education. I mean, you can even find classes where it's like, this is how to teach you how to be on camera. But like no one teaches you how to act with a robot, you know? Yeah. Or like a puppet, or like, you know, I mean, we had this thing, the antenna are totally practical, and they totally redesigned the Tick's costume for season 2 and made it a lot better. But one of the things was, because of restructuring everything, they changed the wiring of the antenna and how they worked. So we got there in the first day of filming, and they turned it on, and it turned out the antenna were like unbearably loud. And we're like on a soundstage, like in a closed set where it's like pin drop quiet. And now we're doing scenes where it sounds like he's having a root canal. And no one ever teaches you, A, how to do scenes with someone whose head is making that much noise and pretend like it isn't happening. And B, no one ever teaches someone in Peter's position how to do dialogue when you can't hear your own thoughts.
So, an eternal, like, little
They worked it out. I mean, it was like
so
R&D. We got it down, but it was like the first couple of days. John Hodgman is on our show this season, and he came in episode 2, and so we warned him. We said like, hey, just you know, they're still working on it, but there's this thing with the antenna, and he was like, okay. And we did the first scene, and he went, you know, you guys warned me, and still, when the noise started, I almost stopped the scene and went, can we please hold the construction? And it was a genuine, he thought someone was hammering, because it was like that. It sounded like AOL dial-up. That was the analogy I used on set. It was like, stuff like that's like very hard to do, and the stuff with the lobsters, things that are very technical. Anytime CGI comes into the equation, you know, your positions have to be within a specific centimeter, you know, or else the entire shot is ruined. And you're trying to find these behavioral moments and things like that. So the answer is it's incredibly difficult. But like we all love the show we're making and want to make. Like, as a kid, when I saw Ghostbusters, and I was like, why isn't every movie Ghostbusters? Like, every movie should be funny and have special effects in it. That should be everything. And then you work on something like this, and you're like, oh, that's why. Because some people like sleeping at night. That's why most people don't make Ghostbusters.
They have families, and they enjoy having sleeping time.
Right, right.
They can't be here forever.
Right,
yeah.
right. So for me, it's like I'm getting to make the show I always dreamed of making, but then you realize why, A, people don't try that often, and B, why they do so often. One element doesn't connect. The effects look bad, but the comedy's good, or vice versa. And it's like, we kind of have to make like 5 shows at the same time. Because you have these things like doing big, like stunt-based scenes, and doing scenes that are really CGI-based, and doing things that are purely comedic and things that are purely dramatic. It's like a weird balancing of tones. And my favorite things are like that. You know, I mean, like RoboCop's like for me as good as any movie that's ever been made, and that's a movie where it's like everything. You get everything. It's a full like sampler platter of every type of storytelling. But doing it is just a lot of trial and error to figure out how to create a workflow.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, whatever you guys are doing, don't stop. It's fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I really do enjoy this show. I got a million more questions, but so does the internet. So let's start with this one from Twitter. Someone's after your heart here. At NoContextDP. Griffin, I loved you as a TV exec on Difficult People. If that was your real job, what kind of show would you like to greenlight or reboot?
Well, the first answer is I would pick up Tick for like 6 more seasons. That would be, I think, that's my leading move. What kind of show would I like to greenlight or reboot? That's a good question. I'm trying to think of shows that I think, you know, it's weird. Like there's such a big reboot trend in TV now. And not like resetting reboots, but we're just gonna pick up Will and Grace 15 years later, or Full House, or Murphy Brown, or any of these. And I always feel like I love Cheers, but I have no desire to see. I don't want to go back. Right, because it's like it's so purely crystallized. So if I wanted to reboot something, it would probably be a show that I thought wasn't particularly good in the first place. Oh, this is a weird answer, and now it's going to sound backhanded. There's a Japanese live-action show called Giant Robo that was like weirdly cut and redubbed and adapted for American TV called Johnny Sacco and His Flying Robot. That's about a little boy who gets in a cruise ship crash. and ends up on a mysterious island, and this dying scientist gives him remote control for like the world's most powerful robot, and he's the one person who can control it.
So that's the show?
So it's like an Iron Giant type thing, but the robot is just sort of what he's puppeteering. I would do that.
That's
See,
the one you
this
would
is
do?
why I'm not a TV exec, because no one wants to see that.
Because we'd have, what was it?
Johnny Sacco and his flying robot.
Johnny
That's
Sacco
right.
and
I
his
would
flying
have,
robot.
It would be an entire
That's the answer.
network of just Johnny Sacco
That's
24 hours a day. No one
the
will
answer-
ever hire me to run a TV
It's Johnny
station.
Sacco and his giant robot. That's
Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah.
We've also have some questions in the room. The first one is going to come from over here with the microphone. Go for it.
Hi. You mentioned briefly how many auditions you have to do as a struggling actor, and I imagine you had dozens before doing The Tick.
Hundreds.
Hundreds,
Yeah.
thousands, millions.
Not bragging. It's over a long period of time.
Yeah. I'm just curious if there's any like that you remember that kind of like crashed and burned that you're now able to look back at fondly now that you've had your big break.
Yeah. I mean, too many, but this is the one I'm gonna tell. So I like when I dropped out of college and was like, I'm gonna give this a shot, and then did years and years and years of crappy auditions, and I booked like one job a year and eat dollar pizza. And my dream was when I dropped out of college, because I believe very strongly in like setting like unreasonably high goals for yourself, so that you're pretty happy if you like can settle for a 4. You know, you like aim for a 10, but you make your 10 so outrageous that the 4 is like still pretty good. So I was like, I want to play a superhero someday. And I'm very aware of what I look like. And outside of this one character who has generalized anxiety and is not in shape, it didn't seem like there was ever going to be an opportunity for me to play a superhero, but I set that as my North Star to go for. And then about 2 years before The Tick happened, I threw a weird series of events because it was like a top secret thing where they wouldn't let you read the script and you didn't really know what you were auditioning for, and the sides were vague. Ended up being one of the finalists to play Michelangelo in the live-action Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movies. And they like did the thing where they were like, hey, so it's Ninja Turtles, that was the thing you're auditioning for, you're getting on a plane tomorrow, they're flying you to Hollywood. And then they put us in a room with all this Ninja Turtles memorabilia, and they're like, you have to sign 1,000 NDAs and read this script, and then go in tomorrow and do the thing. Now, what they didn't know is my mom didn't let me watch Ninja Turtles growing up. I'm like the only kid of the 80s and 90s who didn't watch Ninja Turtles in any way. She forbade it. She thought the bad behavior, too much fighting, too much pizza, right? Just out of here. So I had no idea. I truly, and I'm pretty like omnivorous with pop culture, had no real understanding of the Ninja Turtles.
That's a crazy blind spot for you to have had.
Right. So when I got the audition, I just read the pages, and I was like, I think this might be Ninja Turtles, but they're being secretive about it. I don't know what this character is supposed to behave like, so I'm just going to play it like my brother when he was little. Because my brother was like this little guy who just was like a big jock. He's like built like me, but he's a big jock, and he had like so much energy, and he would always be like shadow boxing or like pretending to do a slam dunk contest. Like he'd be pretending to do sports with people who weren't there. So I was like, I'm just gonna do that. Like I'm gonna make my Ninja Turtle like a kid who's like constantly like fighting ninjas on the playground. And then they were like, they're flying you to Hollywood. And I was like, what? So I went in and I was like, hey, you should know I've never seen Ninja Turtles. And they were like, cool, do not repeat that to anyone else. That is the last time you're saying that out loud. And I was like, you just need to tell me here, like, why did you like the tape so I know what to repeat? Right. And she said, the director really liked your methy vibe. And I said, method? Like method acting? And she went, no, like you were doing this like Jesse Pinkman Breaking Bad, like you were like tweaking out and like... And I was like, I was doing like a little kid, and she was like, okay, well, look, it doesn't matter what you're trying to do. Don't tell anyone you don't know Ninja Turtles. Just go in and try to do the same thing tomorrow. And I went in and did it, right? And I was like staying up all night, and I got toy nunchucks. I was practicing, and I was like, don't be confident. Don't be neurotic. You have to sell them on you being an action star. So I went in the next day for this like big screen test for a movie, and you signed the contract, and you're like signing the contract where it's like, you would make this many $1 million. And you're like, oh boy, okay. They make you sign the 30-page contract before you do the final audition. So I'm like, I see my future here, right? And we go in, it's a group audition with other guys. I'm sorry, this is a long story, but this is a hot one. So we go in with the group, and I'm sort of doing the bit, and I'm trying to play tough. And the director goes, Griffin, I don't know. Do you think you could try maybe like just playing it like neurotic? And I was like, I mean, do you want to break this seal? I can do it, but you have to, this is slippery slope. And he was like, just try what if instead of being like defensive and aggro, you were kind of having a panic attack. And I did that, and he was like, yes, that's my Michelangelo. That's what I'm looking for, that neurotic vibe. So then I just kept amping up, and I was like rubbing my temples and retreating into my turtle shell and having like, protracted breathing and everything. And everyone's like, oh my God, this is so ballsy what you're doing. And I was like, I'm like Johnny Depp in Pirates of the Caribbean. Like I'm like doing this like countercultural, like this crazy, I'm smuggling this weird performance in. And everyone's like, oh my God, you got this. And then the next day they sent the tape to Paramount and they were like, absolutely not. Who let this happen? Like in the room, everyone was high-fiving me and they were like, you're about to be a star. And then all it took was like, the head of Paramount being like, we want kids to like this. He's a party dude. We're trying to sell skateboards. Why is this guy having a panic attack on camera? So that was like a big like go big or go home thing where it was like, I went all in on generalized anxiety Michelangelo. And I came out of it and I went, that was the only chance I'll ever get to play a superhero. And then 2 years later, they were like, it's a superhero with generalized anxiety. And I was like...
You were like, are you sure?
Yeah. They still told me to tone it down a little bit. At the first table read, they were like, it's a little much.
That is incredible.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that story with us.
No, that's a pretty good example of someone like crashing and burning, right?
Pretty solid example, yeah. Okay, I've got one more. All right, let's do one more question. What do we got? Come on down.
Hi there. How's it going?
How's it going?
So I'm very curious to know, what are the differences or similarities in preparing for a role with a pre-established background, like your character in The Tick, as opposed to a role that's kind of made up and you have to establish it's like their own background?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's tough because it's a thing where I'm constantly questioning, like, I want to make sure I don't tip too far into one side or the other. So it's like you have a comic book series and 2 other TV shows. And Ben was like, treat those like those are like alternate universe realities. These are like different circumstances that could have led to this guy. But I don't want someone to do an impression. And I, in fact, sort of tried to hide from Ben when I was auditioning that I was a fan, because I could tell that he didn't want people who were like, oh, I got to do a Warburton. I got to do, a Rob Paulson or whatever. So I tried to, as much as possible, like, look at the script, look at the scenes, approach it like anything else I was an actor and go, what's the most honest way to do this? And then after I made those choices, I would run it through the filter in my head as a fan, having read everything and watched everything, of going, do any of these choices fundamentally bump up against what I think are the core tenets of the guy? Are there any things here that feel like that's out of line? Because I want to, ideally, if you're a fan of the previous versions of the show, you watch it and you go, yeah, that's Arthur. That's the character I know. Even if I don't look exactly the same or sound exactly the same or do everything exactly the same, that it feels like the core of the thing is there. Because like I use the Batman example of like Michael Keaton, Christian Bale, and Adam West could not be more different from each other. But all 3 of them you look at and you go like, yeah, that's Batman. So you want to like lock into what you think the most important things are, the most universal things. What are the consistencies across the history of the character? And you just keep that in the back of your mind, then really just focus on the scene, block the rest of it out, and then you do one final pass. So it's like a series of like layers. Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, it's hard to talk. I can never verbalize it very well. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
That's pretty good. Thank you so much for your question.
Thank
you
you
for
for
all
your
your
question.
questions.
Yes, thank you.
For internet questions and in-person questions, all questions were fantastic. Thank you. And thank you, man, for being here and hanging out with us.
Oh,
we got
please,
we
such a
got to wrap
pleasure.
things up. But
hashtag neurotic Michelangelo.
yeah,
if you wanna.
hashtag neurotic Michelangelo.
Probably 2 years away from another reboot, so maybe, yeah. I really want to bring the New York of the Ninja Turtles to the forefront.
Just bring it all up to the surface.
Finally, the Jewish Ninja Turtles movie that I've been dreaming of my entire life.
That's the reboot.
Yeah.
Teenage Jewish Ninja Turtles.
Yeah,
that's what
Mutant Jewish Turtles.
You just fold it into the theme song.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I'm there, day one.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's one ticket sold.
Your podcast, Blank Check, what people can find on iTunes where podcasts are.
Yeah, we talk about movies.
Yeah, we talk about movies. When's the next episode coming? Do you know yet?
It's every Sunday.
Every Sunday.
Episode's coming out. So we pick a director and we go through their whole filmography. It's about when people have a massive success and then get blank checks to make whatever they want. So we just are finishing up Tim Burton now. So I think Sunday is Mrs. Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, a movie that most people don't think exists. Raise your hand if you have heard of that movie before. Okay.
Okay, fair enough.
Fair enough.
That's not bad.
Single digits in a double-digit room, though. I'm just saying. For a big movie.
Yeah, for a Tim Burton movie.
Yeah.
which
Yeah,
is
that
pretty-
came out like 2 years ago.
It totally happened.
Yeah, totally
It was
happened.
in the theater.
Made like $80 million. Yeah.
Did it really?
It did, yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's every Sunday. Blank check. And The Tick is on Amazon right now. It's on Amazon Prime. If you haven't watched it, watch it immediately.
Please.
It's fantastic, and you're missing out.
Please.
And
Tweet about it and tell people.
tweet about it. Tell
Yeah.
people. And if you watch it again.
Yeah.
If you have an extra laptop, just put it on, let it loop, just let it play. That's how you get season 3, right?
Oh, yeah, and
never know.
here's a big thing. I feel like we've been talking around this, but you don't need to know anything else to watch this show.
No.
It has no connection to the previous versions. It's not part of any larger universe. If you want to watch The Tick, you put on episode 1. That's all you need to know.
Absolutely
Yeah.
true. Griffin, thank you so much again
you
for
so
being
much.
here.
Pleasure
Guys,
talking.
if you remember that obscene amount of noise, let's go ahead and top it. Let's make a ridiculously obscene amount of noise.
Absurd.
And thank Griffin Newman right here.
Ridiculous. Thank you.